In a nightmarish, ruined world slowly awakening to the light after sleeping in darkness, the infant rediscoveries of science are secretly nourished by cloistered monks dedicated to the study and preservation of the relics and writings of the blessed Saint Isaac Leibowitz. From here, the story spans centuries of ignorance, violence, and barbarism, viewing through a sharp, satirical eye the relentless progression of a human race, damned by its inherent humanness to re-celebrate its grand foibles and repeat its grievous mistakes. Hello and welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I am your host Liam, aka Himvar. Today I'll be doing a spoiler-free review of Walter M. Miller Jr.'s A Canticle for Leibowitz. Canticle for Leibowitz is a 1959 novel by Walter M. Miller Jr. It is a post-apocalyptic setting starting in the southwestern desert of the United States, many years after a nuclear holocaust destroyed the world as we know it. Surviving at an oasis, the priests at the Abbey of Leibowitz hold onto the old ways of Catholicism centuries after the flame deluge and fallout, which the fallout actually to them is a mythical beast as science is essentially lost. The priests at the Abbey preserve the lost knowledge from before the nuclear holocaust, though they don't really understand it. This knowledge is essential for the Renaissance later in the book. The story is technically a fix-up novel divided into 3 parts, set 600 years apart for each one. Brother Francis of Utah, a young priest of sorts, is in solitude and fasting for Lent at the beginning of part 1. He stumbles across something interesting in the ruins from our time, something connected to the Beatus Isaac Edward Leibowitz. Of course, this goes in one guessable direction, is when superiors look down on a 17-year-old Brother Francis, who they think is incompetent and a little ridiculous at times. And so, as to say, he is treated with unfair disbelief that butts heads with sensational belief and embellishment. Now, there is a good amount of Latin in this book. I say good amount, there's actually what some people would probably call a lot, which in this book, it's kind of a lingua franca, again, by way of the Catholic Church since the death of the Old World. Of course, this was written before the Church dropped Latin as its language for Mass and in schools. Now, I overall found this story to be very heartwarming, though somewhat cynical as well. The world building was interesting too, but in part kind of sparse, but focused on the surviving Catholic Church in North America, though the second part definitely does more for world building, including odd customs and nations of the time. There are also some quite emotional parts, sad, devastating, frustrating, and spectacular moments spread throughout. I found Miller's prose very matter-of-fact, nothing fancy or purple. It's also not very exciting, no fast-paced action. It's thoughtful and slow-going, often seemingly a blind meander, as sometimes the pacing kind of suffers, I would say more so in parts 2 and 3, but that could just be a personal thing. Now, there are 3 parts, and somewhat like Asimov's Foundation, these parts jump forward in time. The first part is called Fiat Homo, followed by Fiat Lux and Fiat Voluntas Tua, or in English, let there be man, let there be lights, and thy will be done. These parts really make it a fix-up novel, as mentioned before. They each end wonderfully. The first is 600 years in the future, the second part 600 years after that, and the third 600 years after that. Now part 2 gives us more characters and then expands the world, some for us and a scholarly skeptic, one not wholly convinced the past is as accurate as the monks think it to be. Thaw and Taddeo, a secular scholar, Abbot Dom Paulo, and the Jew Benjamin are the main characters in part 2, the last being the most interesting, though the one with the least amount of time, on the page at least. And this part also deals with the relationship of the church and state. Now, the ending to parts 1 and 2 was a punch that I wasn't expecting, but after it happened twice, I was expecting something similar at the end of part 3, and I can say I really wasn't expecting the ending of part 3 either. Now, part 3 starts off rather oddly. We are shortly introduced to Abbot Dom Jethro Zerchi, who, in the face of another nuclear war between the superpowers, makes plans to send monks to the Abbey to colonize another planet, and I'll leave it for you to read what happens after that. Now, there is a sequel published posthumously in the 90s, finished by a different author, though I hear it isn't nearly as good, so I don't plan to read that since the Canticle of Leibowitz is complete by itself. Now, overall, I really enjoyed this. did find it to be slowly diminishing in entertainment. I found part 1 to be the most entertaining, and then part 2 to be the second, most entertaining. There's definitely one character who stands out a lot, but besides that character, Brother Francis is my favorite, and he's only in part 1. Now, I really do feel like this book packs a punch. I mean, it gives you so many different emotions, and, it kind of feels hopeful, even though there's several times where the author, reminds you that it's not that hopeful, or at least that's the satirical part of the story. But, overall, I really did enjoy it. I would recommend it to you who have not read it, though it is rather popular. You can definitely tell this is a product of the Cold War. I mean, as the nuclear, idea or disaster or what could happen from the Holocaust comes up time and time again, really, in this book. And it's something that, again, you could tell this is definitely a product of its time, not just with the Latin, but with the concept itself. I would say we get less sci-fi books this day that ends with a nuclear fallout on Earth, though that isn't to say we don't get them. Just like, the Sun Eater, for example, has that as a backdrop, though it is set way further in the future than this is. Though, anyways, this has been Liam Lyceum. I'll catch you next time.